Hello, welcome to the shop, home of everything from the murky to the miraculous. That parade sounds like a lot of fun, doesn't it? I don't really know if it's my kind of thing. Musical instruments, the good ones that is, tend to be quite old, and like most old items, they have a history. Passing from hand to hand, generation to generation, you never truly know what one carries. Until it's too late, that is. You see that drum on the shelf? It's very old, dates back to the 17th century, I believe. It happens to be one of those instruments that carries around its story. Would you like to hear it? Good. In that case, take a seat, and I'll tell you the tale of the drummer of Tedworth. They say that this drum is linked to the first recorded poltergeist in England. The story goes that in the town of Ludlow in Wiltshire, a man by the name of William Drury was being a public nuisance. He would walk up and down the streets begging for money while incessantly beating on his drum, much to the displeasure of the locals. On one afternoon, when the drumming was particularly irritating, John Mompesson happened to be passing through Ludlow. Mompesson was a landowner, excise officer, and commission officer in the militia, but is more commonly referred to as a magistrate in contemporary retellings. Importantly, the standing he did have gave him a reason to confront the drummer, who naturally protested, producing documents that supposedly gave him permission to busk. Mompesson identified these as a fake and reported this to the local bailiff. The drum was then confiscated off Drury, much to the displeasure of the vagrant, who begged for it to be returned. Perhaps unwisely, Mompesson refused, and on his instructions, the bailiff escorted Drury to the nearest justice of the peace to have him tried accordingly for insolence and roguery. Considering his work done, Mompesson returned to his hometown of Tedworth, and nothing notable happened in the coming days. However, all of this changed the following April, when the bailiff delivered the drum to his house for safekeeping. The hauntings that followed were extensive, and a full account of these can be found in A Blow at Modern Sadducism, in Some Philosophical Considerations about Witchcraft, by Joseph Glanville, which was published in 1668. I'm sure you won't want to miss your parade, so I shall give you the story in broad strokes. Then again, by the end of this tale, you might want to wait for the marching band to pass before leaving the shop. Mompesson had been away from his house on a trip for a few days and, on returning, found his wife in a distressed state. She said that thieves had broken in while he was away and terrorized the family, making an almighty mess. Surprisingly, that very night the supposed thieves returned, as knocking sounds could be heard all about the house. Being a man of action, Mompesson rose from his bed with pistols drawn and searched each room where the sound could be heard. Curiously, each time he opened the door to the room where the knocking originated from, it stopped, only to restart at a different location in the house. Eventually, Mompesson returned to bed, and as he did so, a great drumming started up on the roof, which drifted further and further away as time passed. This reoccurred the next 5 nights, falling silent every day at dawn. After a month of the sounds existing on the outside of the house, they became more intrusive, locating themselves in the room where the drum was being kept. In here, hollow sounds could be heard throughout all the hours of the night, accompanied by a shaking of the windows and beds. Mompesson could always tell when the next disturbance was coming, as the sound of the drum would be heard travelling all over the house, and this continued for the next 2 months. As if these circumstances weren't already bad enough, the hauntings then moved to the children's bedroom. To start, the room would be filled with the drumming of well-known songs, but after this, the hauntings became more sinister. Under the beds of the children, a deep scratching could be heard, as if being made on the bed frame by iron talons. This would end suddenly, and then they would be violently lifted from their beds and held in the air by an invisible force. The servants of the house would also interact with the demon. In one instance, upon coming across two boards that were moving of their own accord in the children's bedroom, a servant asked for them to be placed in his hand. The boards then moved across the room to the servant. Now this made Montpesson furious, and he forbid the servants from behaving in such a way again. Following this, a sulphurous smell was present throughout the house. Of course, it made sense to enlist the help of a man of God to keep the spirits at bay. The local minister, a Mr. Cragg, answered the call, and so he, along with fellow neighbours, knelt by the children's bedside and prayed. Throughout the prayer, the demon retreated to the cockloft above the room, but alas, once they stopped, it returned with a vengeance. Enraged, it threw anything not fixed to the floor around the room, and parted the bed, even striking the minister in the leg. Becoming increasingly concerned for his children's safety, Montpesson sent all but his eldest daughter away to stay at a friend's house. The daughter that stayed then slept in his room. However, the hauntings merely followed his eldest daughter, and for the next month a relentless drumming would play throughout the night. Since this effort had clearly not yielded any substantial results, he summoned his other children back to the house. On their return to the house, the children then slept in the parlour, and here the hauntings against them were less violent. For the servants, though, instances of severity grew against them in number, with many being lifted from their beds just as had happened to the children before. The hauntings continued in various ways. One night the sound changed to that of a jingling bag of money, and on another, one of Montpesson's sons was hit in the ankle by a door latch that had been thrown across the room by the demon. The night after Christmas Day, the demon threw his wife's clothes all about the room, before hiding her Bible in the ashes of the fire. In the following January, its form changed, becoming a series of lights that would appear throughout the house. One of Montpesson's braver servants then offered to stay in the room next to his, armed with his sword. Supposedly, the servant then frequently did battle with the demon. At times he would slice it where he guessed the apparition would be, and he'd keep it at bay, while on other occasions the demon would hold him down until he struck at it with his sword. If nothing else, the servant's efforts proved that the demon was afraid, or at least pretending to be afraid, of physical weapons. Montpesson was certain that there was a connection between confiscating the drum and the hauntings that had now plagued his family for some time. This was confirmed when, one night, guests of his asked the demon a series of questions. The first asked the demon to knock 3 times if Satan had sent him to terrorize Montpesson's family. The demon obliged and knocked 3 times. The same man asked the demon to knock 5 times if this was the work of the drummer Drury. The demon knocked 5 times. Seeking protection and reassurance, Montpesson asked the local blacksmith to stay. The smithy obliged, but only managed to remain one night, as from evening to dawn a pair of pincers would constantly snip at the poor man, just inches away from his nose. The form the demon took then changed again, on one occasion whispering throughout the house before rattling chains, and on another panting like a tired dog. However, now armed with the knowledge that it feared weapons, Montpesson would slash at where he gauged the demon to be, and so he dealt with the hauntings in this way for some time. It was at this point a stranger thing occurred. Montpesson awoke to find his wife's Bible face down in the ashes of the fireplace. It was open to the 3rd chapter of St. Mark, where it describes unclean footprints falling down before our Saviour. After reading this, he decided to spread ashes out on the floor of the chamber to see if the demon left any tracks. He probably wished he hadn't, for the next day almighty claw marks could be seen spanning the length of the room, accompanied by a series of strange symbols that were not of this world. Perhaps the most curious event the Glanville witnessed was that of the whispering fireplace. One night, the whispering started up again, repeating the phrase, "a witch," at least 100 times. Disturbed by this, Mompesson identified the source as the fireplace and discharged his pistol into it. On closer examination, they found droplets of blood among the firewood where the pistol shot had landed, and, for the next few days, the house was free from any demonic activity. This respite was short-lived, and the being returned with a vengeance, terrorizing the children in extreme ways, throwing their full chamber pots across the room and beating their legs against the posts of their bed. It was around this time the demon showed its true form to one of Mompesson's servants. One night, the servant awoke to a noise in his room, and, at the end of his bed, there were 2 red, glaring eyes. Paralyzed with fear, the servant could do nothing but stare back, and, eventually, the apparition faded back into the darkness. Clearly, the demon was becoming far bolder. Its new set of tricks included turning all the money in one of Mompesson's guests' pockets black, and, on another occasion, it made Mompesson's horse lame, the poor owner discovering the animal near death in its stable, with one of its hind legs rammed into its mouth. However, these pale in comparison to the forms it now took at night. Instead of merely making noises, the demon would take the form of several men and stalk the corridors of the house. Mompesson found the only way to disperse them was to discharge his pistol towards them, at which point they would retreat to a nearby arbour. I suppose you are wondering, how does this haunting end? In truth, I don't think it truly did. Drury was sent to prison for thievery, and while there, boasted that he was responsible for the hauntings at Tedworth. Overheard by the guards, he was tried for this crime and convicted, his sentence being transference overseas. Once he had left the country, the haunting stopped too, but whenever he was rumoured to have returned to England illegally, they would start straight back up again. Now, this story is obviously very old, and no account details exactly what happens to the drum. You are more than welcome to buy this one off the shelf, but ask yourself this. Is it worth the risk? Drury supposedly met a man who gave him an authentic book on witchcraft while he fought as a soldier under Cromwell. All that malice, pain and mistrust placed in a single item. In some ways, I suppose it's quite the bargain. Not for you? Well, I'd say that's fair. I don't know of anyone who'd want to experience a haunting like that which occurred at Tedworth.